The war in Ukraine is in its 9th month, and it's still too early to tell what it will give birth to. I have said nothing about it so far, and I didn't think I would. I usually try to stay away from commenting on politics of other countries, or on conflicts they are involved in, mainly because I know what it sounds like when outsiders comment on the politics and conflicts of my country. Almost none of them have any idea what they are talking about. So I limit myself to talking about issues that I do know something about. And, from the early days of the war and most prominently in the last couple of months, it became obvious that this particular conflict is heavily influenced by something that I do actually know a lot about: the culture wars. The culture wars that we have been waging online for the past decade culminated in this very real and bloody war, or at least play a significant part in it. So today, with a critical eye, we shall look at this war from that perspective. When I say culture wars, I am talking about two in particular. One is the three-way war between globalism, imperialism, and nationalism. The other is the war between liberalism on one side and the anti-liberal forces that have been attacking it in recent years, from both the left and the right. Let's begin with the latter. A lot of people are asking, why aren't the Russian people resisting President Putin, a leader who is obviously taking their freedoms away, one by one? Well, this recent Russian ad can provide some of the answer.
Как я давно хотел это сделать.
В Америку летите?
Да, переезжаем.
Америка самая свободная страна. Страна возможностей.
А вы с мужем летите?
Да, мы вместе. Он сейчас подойдет. А вот и мой муж. Знакомьтесь.
Эмили.
Простите, мистер. Пассажиры позади вас вегетарианцы. Им неприятно, что при них употребляют мясо.
Мы же их не заставляем это.
Простите, но в США принято придерживаться принципов демократии. Позвольте, я это заберу.
Парень, тут очередь в туалет.
What do you want?
В очередь, говорю, вставь в туалет.
I want to go to the toilet.
Простите, мистер, что случилось?
Да вот парень без очереди лезет тут.
И что? Вы не хотите его пропустить?
Я?
Конечно, конечно. Его надо пропустить. Мы подождем. Его народ долгие годы терпел притеснение белых. Мы перед всеми афроамериканцами в долгу. Простите нас, сэр.
Прошу вас. Вы не могли бы пересесть в носовую часть самолета?
В смысле, я один?
Нет, вы все трое.
Зачем?
Там сзади пара, а не child-free. Дело в том, что ваш сын попадает в поле их зрения, и это вызывает у них дискомфорт.
Прости, матушка Россия! Мы возвращаемся!
Pretty on point, isn't it? It is quite an accurate description of woke Twitter. And Americans should know, this is what the rest of us see when we look at you nowadays. Of course, this represents only a small portion of the American population. But we see you through social media, so this is how you come off. What is happening in Russia is what I always feared, that all this woke bullshit, attacking and undermining liberal values, might not be strong enough to destroy the West, but will end up strengthening anti-liberal forces in other parts of the world. Putin is just one of many leaders who portray wokeness as something that the elites are trying to foist on the people, and convince the people that the only thing that can save their culture is to give him more and more powers, so he can save them from these elites.
So I'd like to return to what I said earlier and address all citizens, not just colleagues in the room, to all Russian citizens. Do we want in our country, in Russia, instead of a mother and a father, that we should have parent number one, parent number two? They've gone mad. Do we want that in our schools, in the early primary schools, that we should teach this perversion, that we should talk about not just men and women, but that there would be an additional gender? Is that what we want for our children, for our country? We will not accept that. We have our own future that lies ahead of us. And this is an attack directed not just against us, but all societies, but all Western societies, this very negation of humankind, this denial of freedom.
In short, give me all the power so you can be free. Here we have it, the culture wars in the West strengthening despotic leaders elsewhere. The transgender debate is a good example. There are some trans activists, of the type who want to smash cis-normativity, who are trying to push their ideology on children in an attempt to shape their mind. On the other side, there are also some anti-trans activists who are grossly misrepresenting and exaggerating the extent of this problem. And the result, as we can see, is that Putin can exploit it to shape the minds of ordinary Russians. Because of your ideological zeal, you are complicit in the suffering of the people of Russia and Ukraine. Think about what you're doing. What did Putin mean when he was talking about parent 1 and parent 2? When I googled this phrase, the only relevant first-page result I got was this 2019 article in Newsweek, which does indeed make it seem like France decided to change the school textbooks and replace mother and father with parent 1 and parent 2. But I found it hard to believe that France would do such a thing, so I looked further into it and discovered that the law was proposed and then abandoned, and anyway, if I understood correctly, it wasn't about the textbooks, but about the official documents concerning the pupils. In short, it's another case of Russian propaganda and disinformation. Then again, when I looked into it, I found some woke people commenting positively about the idea, and such comments lend credence to this Russian propaganda, put fear in the hearts of common people, and make the propaganda effective. So, before we move on, I'd like to take a moment to explain why it is not a good idea. First of all, it is easy to see that this never ends. The idea here is that parent 1 and parent 2 is more inclusive than mother and father, because it includes LGBT parents as well. But if you do that, then you will have problems explaining why you always draw people with 4 limbs, instead of being inclusive towards amputees, and why they always wear clothes, when some people are nudists. And then you get a debate about school curriculum that is every bit as ridiculous as this flight. Worse, it's an abandonment of the Socratic ideal of treating students as thinking individuals, who should be allowed to develop their thinking. The woke belief is that words shape our consciousness, so if we teach children the right words, they would grow up without prejudice. It goes back to the attempts to create a perfect language, which were quite popular in philosophy a century ago. Since then, however, we came to the realization that reality is way too messy and complicated to allow for a perfect language. To teach children how not to be prejudiced, we should actually make them aware of the diversity of human existence. Don't try to find a word that encompasses all cases, but keep speaking in words that express the most common cases, and then explain to the pupils that there are also exceptions, and that these exceptions are alright as well. We use mother and father because heterosexual couples are the norm, but it is okay to have parents who are of a different type. In this way, students can learn to be more open-minded to other atypical cases they encounter in life. As we see, then, Putin is exploiting the war in the West between liberal culture and woke culture to gain power. And many Western right-wingers thus perceive him to be very based and red-pilled, the type of leader they wish they could have. If you are one of those people, if you were one of those who got red-pilled in the culture wars, and you think Putin is your guy, it is time for you to stop and reflect. Think back. What was it that red-pilled you? Well, it was the way the woke left were behaving. You were concerned by certain authoritarian tendencies that they had, like promoting online censorship, centralized government, and cancel culture. You were also repelled by their identity politics, like when they claimed that white people invented bigotry, or when they foist a group identity on people who don't identify with it, or when they call everyone who disagrees with these actions a Nazi. And you were alarmed by their repression of culture, their capitulation to Islamists, and their undermining of democracy. Today, Putin is your guy, so he must be the antithesis of those things, right? Right? Let's see. How is he on online censorship? Is Russia, under his leadership, allowing free expression online?
Russia's parliament on Friday passed a law imposing a jail term of up to 15 years for spreading fake information about the armed forces, as Moscow fights back in what it casts as an information war over the conflict in Ukraine.
Today's morning, Instagram became unavailable for all the Russian citizens, and none of them are able to access it somehow except VPN services. We also see that massive restrictions are imposed to the social networks other than Instagram. So, for example, Twitter or Facebook. Those social networks not only blocked in Russia, but also recognized as a terrorist and extremist communities. And basically, if you are a signed user there and you have an account on Facebook or Instagram, under the Russian law, Russian prosecution may recognize you as a terrorist or extremist, which make it danger for the people to use those social networks in Russia, even through the VPN service.
Oof, that actually sounds 1,000 times worse than anything the woke are doing. Perhaps he's against centralized government, then. Nah, even his biggest worshippers won't claim that. He is pretty much the poster child for centralized government. How about cancel culture, then?
USA Today put out an incredible report back in 2017 in which they documented 38 cases of prominent Russians who had died suspiciously in the previous 3 years. They included 10 high-profile critics of Putin, 7 diplomats, 6 associates of Kremlin power brokers, 13 military or political leaders involved in the conflict over eastern Ukraine. 12 were shot, stabbed, or beaten to death. 6 were blown up. 1 died of mysterious head injuries. 1 reportedly slipped and hit his head in a public bath. 1 was hanged in a jail cell, and 1 died after drinking coffee, end quote. The other 16 were reported as either natural causes or unknown. The Committee to Protect Journalists says that in the 22 years that Putin has been in power, 25 Russian journalists have been murdered. A whole bunch of them apparently just fell out of windows.
Huh. Throwing people out of windows is cancel culture taken to the level that the woke can only dream of. How about identity politics? Surely, Putin isn't one of those who claim that white people are the source of all bigotry, right?
Look at colonial history. The West should be reminded that it is back in the Middle Ages that the West started this tradition of colonization. There was the slave trade, there was the plundering of India, Africa. There were the wars of France and England against China, Asia.
Apparently he does. But he would not foist a group identity on people who don't want it, and judge them by that identity. Surely.
I've always thought that Ukrainians and Russians are one people, at least one ethnic group.
Oh, right. There's that. Okay, but at least he isn't calling those who disagree with him Nazis, does he?
Столкновение России с этим возникшим на территории Украины неонацистским режимом было неизбежным.
I don't know, guys. That actually looks like the worst case of identity politics I've ever seen. But at least he isn't caving to Islamists. A strong leader like Putin would never allow Islamists and jihadis to gain power.
Of Russia's war strategy, Ramzan Kadyrov was bestowed with a top military rank by the Kremlin. The Chechen leader said that being given the rank of a colonel general was a huge honor for him. He also said Putin had personally informed him about the promotion. The rank of colonel general is the third highest command rank in the Russian military hierarchy.
Seriously? Okay, how about repression of culture? I hear that while the Putin government centralizes power, it does at least allow and protect cultural freedom. It's not like the repression we currently have in the West.
The women of Pussy Riot spent hours waiting in their glass box for the judge to start reading her verdict. This is why Russia's religious were offended. A 30-second performance in Moscow's main cathedral praying for President Vladimir Putin to go. The judgment took 3 hours to read, and throughout there was little doubt it would find them guilty. The judge frequently referred to their behaviour as insulting and disrespectful to the Orthodox Church and all of Russia's faithful. She criticised their short skirts and high kicks and said they were motivated by hatred for religion. She ruled they remained a danger to society and sentenced them to 2 years.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. So what's left on our list? Undermining democracy.
The referendums in Ukraine are done, and as hurriedly the votes were announced by Russia, the results too came with lightning speed. And there are no surprises here. Kremlin-backed proxies have claimed overwhelming victory. As per the tally released on Tuesday, 93.1% of voters in Zaporizhzhia support joining Russia. Almost 87% of people in Kherson are in favor of joining Russia, while in Luhansk the number stands at nearly 98.5%. And a hard-to-believe 99.23% in Donetsk.
You guys are not even trying to make it look believable, are you? Sounds to me like Putin is everything bad about wokeness, multiplied by 1,000,000. How is it, then, that so many who call themselves red-pilled show varying degrees of support for him? Because a lot of them, who started out as defenders of liberalism against the anti-liberal left, turned their back on liberalism, after coming to the conclusion that wokeness is its inevitable result. How does one come to such a dumb conclusion? I'm guessing that they saw how weak the establishment's reaction was to the woke mob, how in many cases it actually embraced the woke and allowed them to gain power, and concluded that, since the woke seem to be more committed than these weak-ass liberals, they will inevitably win. This was the first step, before falling into the black hole of rejecting liberalism altogether, and believing we need rigid conservative values and a strong leader who will protect them. This betrays a fundamental misunderstanding of the power of liberalism, and how it works. The power of liberalism isn't in the actions of the leaders, but in the way the liberal society acts, and these actions work in a less visible and much slower way, but a way that is a lot more effective in the long run. A liberal society doesn't oppress bad and fanatical ideas, but allows them to be expressed. Yes, the fanatics enjoy some power for a while, and it can have some bad repercussions, but it is much better than the alternative, which is to live in a society that oppresses ideas. Eventually, the fanatics eat themselves out, while the liberal society slowly chews up and digests their ideas, and eventually spits them out. The aim of the battle against these ideas is not to achieve a swift and glorious victory, but to allow this slow digestive process to occur. Which means that you always have to deal with pernicious ideas roaming the public sphere. But this is actually one of the things that are great about being a liberal activist. You are always engaged in a heroic battle for freedom. Liberal democracies are evidently much better than other systems, and the fight to preserve them is a fight for the good. The woke ideas have been festering in the academy for decades, and in the 2010s they finally broke to the surface, allowing us to have fun knocking them down. The years 2014 to 2017 were just jam-packed with filthy fun. But then, because we didn't achieve victory right away, many gave up on liberalism and drifted towards anti-liberal right-wing ideologies. Really? Because some idiots in some progressive enclaves managed to gain some limited power, you are going to damn the entire liberal order? If you want to see where this leads to, look at Russia. Look at the catastrophe that is now befalling the Russian people, who allowed these right-wing, anti-liberal ideas to take over their country, a country that seemed to be on its way to democracy. Your black-pilled attitude, stemming from your misunderstanding of liberalism, is inching your countries closer to this reality. A reflection of this misunderstanding could be seen about a year ago, when a video comparing recruitment ads to the US and Russian armies went viral. A number of American right-wing figures shared this video, including Senator Ted Cruz. To be fair to them, this happened months before the war, so they weren't standing by Russia during its invasion, but they still made fools of themselves. If you don't remember, here's the video.
Это первый день твоей новой жизни. Что ты знаешь о себе? На что ты способен? Вопросы могут остаться без ответов, но разве ты сможешь узнать себя, познать границы своих возможностей? К черту границы! Ты готов ломать себя? Да, потому что без врага нет боя, а без боя нет победы. Но на самом деле, главный враг вчерашний — ты. Твоя задача — выследить врага, догнать его, превзойти, стать лучше, чем он, и вернуться назад.
It begins in California, with a little girl raised by two moms. I also marched for equality. I like to think I've been defending freedom from an early age. Standing at the altar to marry my other mom. With such powerful role models, I finished high school at the top of my class. I found it. A way to prove my inner strength and maybe shatter some stereotypes along the way. I'm U.S. Army Corporal Emma Malone Lord, and I answered my calling.
Where was Ted Cruz's mistake? That, as often happens with conservatives, he didn't realize that times have changed. If this was 20 years ago, when such ads were shown on TV or in movie theaters, he would have been right. The American ad speaks only to a niche audience and would have had a net negative effect on the willingness of viewers to join the army. The Russian ad would have been more effective. But today, these ads run on social media, so you can target niche groups. When you create ads aimed at many different groups, you are turning your army into an army of the people, where citizens of all walks of life volunteer to serve, feeling like they are pulling together to preserve their different ways of life. It is also an expression of a thriving liberal democracy, which allows new ideas to be expressed and tried out, leading, among other things, to the creation of new technologies, which is what makes a strong army nowadays. The Russian ad, on the other hand, portrays Russians in the way their leaders would like to imagine them. Instead of allowing different types of people to grow and become stronger, it stamps an ideal image on them, creating the illusion that Russia is a nation of Ivan Dragos that doesn't need to better itself. This actually goes way back in Russian culture. To this day, the term Potemkin village is used as a metaphor for facade, taken from the famous story of when Tsarina Katerina II made a visit to Crimea in 1787, shortly after it was annexed by Russia for the first time. Katerina wanted to see how the reconstruction was going, so the local governor, Potemkin, created beautiful mobile villages, made of cardboard and glue, for her to see from her chariot. Russia is a country telling itself that it is strong, and that its society, based on conservative values, is healthier than the West, when in fact it is a society marred by alcoholism, fatherlessness, corruption, bigotry, and lawlessness. The Russians keep bragging that they are creating new advanced weapons, but with a repressed civil society, their technology has fallen far behind, and corruption ensures that even what they have is in bad shape. Putin, meanwhile, staffed his army with mediocre generals who would not be able to threaten his popularity, and surrounded himself with yes-men who tell him what he wants to hear. As a result, he completely misjudged the Ukrainian society, believing it would fall before his troops, and when proven wrong, found himself with an ill-equipped and low-morale army, commanded by incompetent generals. I hope some of the Western conservatives who fell for this facade learned their lesson. Ukraine, meanwhile, is a wonderful testament to the power of liberal democracy. No one gave Ukraine any chance before the war. Not only was it up against an empire, but also many in its elites had sympathies for that empire, and wanted to go back to being part of Mother Russia. This is one reason why the Russians thought that Ukraine will quickly fold. But Ukraine, in recent years, developed a strong civil society, which is very patriotic, democratic, pro-Western, and anti-Russian. The Ukrainian army is an army of the people, representing all sections. This army allows soldiers to wear non-official patches, resulting in many creative patches representing a multitude of identities, one of them being the unicorn patch that represents gay soldiers, a colorful contrast to the rampant homophobia of the Russians. The weapons that the Ukrainian army has are kind of laughable, but the spirit is enough to make it stand up to what we thought was the second strongest army in the world. Before any of you start telling me how Ukraine isn't that great, I didn't say it was. No country is perfect, but liberal democracies deal with their problems. Ukraine is considered a corrupt country. Yeah, corrupt by Western standards, squeaky clean by Russian standards. If it continues to drift to the West, it will become less corrupt as well. It has some Nazis in it. Yeah, so does any other country, and democracies allow them to express themselves, so we can gauge just how powerful they are within the society. Ukraine has a complicated history with the Nazis, which only makes it all the more impressive that today they don't have any kind of power in the state, nor in its civil society. Ukraine used to have a Nazi problem. Its liberal society dealt with it. Let's move on to the second culture war, the one between nationalism, imperialism, and globalism. Back in 2016, shortly before the American elections, I made a video titled War with Russia, in which I tried to assuage the fears that World War III would break if Hillary Clinton wins the elections, as was the prediction at the time. I got a lot of flack for it, but I still stand by most of what I said. I said that the Americans will not get involved in direct war with Russia over Ukraine or Syria. And, as we see, President Biden is very careful not to get directly involved. I also argued that President Obama was running a sensible foreign policy, whereas Putin's foreign policy is a disaster. This was an unpopular opinion at the time, but we see today what Putin's leadership is worth. Just like I said back then, his actions back in 2014 made him lose the Ukrainian public forever, which means that he lost Ukraine. From a country that was evenly split between pro-Western and pro-Russian voters, it became a country that is vehemently anti-Russian. And Putin is so dense that he didn't even realize this change, and thought the Ukrainians will welcome his invasion. Where I was wrong in that video is that I predicted the Ukraine conflict will end with Russia keeping the Donbass, without a major war. I was wrong for several reasons. First, I thought Ukraine would be forced to accept this, and didn't realize that the Ukrainians are ballsy enough to go to war with the Russian Empire over these regions. If it wasn't for that, if they would have given in to the Russian demands before the war, I think it would have ended there, at least for the foreseeable future. Then again, I now believe I also underestimated how aggressive the Russians were in their intentions toward Ukraine. This is because, first, I underestimated just how bad of a statesman Putin is. But, more importantly, I didn't realize how much imperialism is still part of the Russian culture. When the war began, I thought the Russians would simply force the issue in the Donbass, like they did with the breakaway regions in Georgia, and leave the rest of Ukraine alone. I quickly realized how wrong I was. I was always pro-Ukraine, but I thought the Russians had a case in some of their arguments. First, as we shall discuss, It is true that the West is too zealous about spreading democracy around the globe, and the Russian fear about NATO expansion is genuine. I get why Putin is afraid of Ukraine becoming part of NATO, of having Western weaponry so close to Moscow. I also thought that what transpired in Ukraine after 2014 was a civil war situation, and that gave the Russians some legitimacy to intervene on the pro-Russian side. So I had some sympathy for the Russian position at the beginning of the war. What is not legitimate, however, is carrying out a ridiculously bogus referendum in the regions you occupied, and then annexing those regions based on this referendum. This is imperialism, in all its evil glory. And you just have to see how the Russian outlets are cheering it on, how Alexander Dugin is bastardizing the history of Western philosophy to justify Russian expansion, and how the Russian leadership talks about Ukrainians, to realize that this is a malady of the Russian spirit, that is still thinking in terms that most countries and cultures left behind. When I saw this, I decided I saw enough to break my silence and speak up on behalf of the Ukrainians. Some YouTube commenters, who are familiar with Russia, claim that Ukraine was supposed to be just the beginning, and Russia plans to expand further. I am still not convinced about that. So far, all I see is them trying to annex regions with a significant number of Russian speakers. In any case, it is imperialism, and should be opposed. So you would expect those who call themselves anti-imperialists to be completely on Ukraine's side, right? Wrong. That woke faction that calls itself anti-imperialist recognizes only one form of imperialism, that of the American brand. And everything that happens in the world, they interpret as somehow resulting from American imperialism. This is an idiotic way to look at the world, and in the past, it just made them look stupid. But their reaction to the Ukraine war has been an utter disgrace. I mean, any video uploaded by Jimmy Dore on this issue makes me yearn for the more sane and factual takes of Alex Jones. There is such a thing as American imperialism. It isn't nearly as bad as Russian imperialism, which is the old-fashioned imperialism of annexing territories, but it is still harmful. Americans are driven by the belief that all the people in the world are essentially like them, wanting democracy and freedom, and it is only their leaders who are imposing despotic rule on them. So America, they believe, must help these countries by changing the regime and guiding their transition to democracy. This doesn't take into account the cultural differences between the nations, and has led America to some disastrous decisions. The so-called anti-imperialists are right about that, but they go overboard. Let's take this twit as an example.
I've lived my whole career for 42 years of active duty, listening to different narratives and seeing those perspectives from different sides and finding a lot of merit in the various positions and saying if you would sit down to speak with each other, we'd actually get somewhere. So let me be specific. China looks today not completely different from the Han Dynasty, a centralized administrative state. And with Confucian culture, with a tradition of excellence of the Mandarins. And that political culture is more than 2,000 years old. When you are looking at Russia, Putin looks a lot like a Tsar. It's not an accident. That is a culture of authority and a culture of tradition. When I look at my own country, the United States, it is a semi-democratic, white-dominated, hierarchical, racist society that aims to preserve privilege by the elites. That's how it was formed in 1787. It was a slave-owning, genocidal country, killing Native Americans for a white culture. But amazingly, it still looks that way, although we're much more diverse now than we were.
Let me ask you this, Jeff, because this is...
I want to point out that these are deep cultural distinctions.
Right.
But we shouldn't just simplify because we say democracy and
I'm sure you noticed he portrays China and Russia in the most sympathetic light he can, and America in the most unsympathetic light, glossing over the fact that the history of racism, slavery, and genocide in China and Russia is much worse than in America. This already shows us who we are dealing with. But I agree with him that the current systems of governance in these countries are rooted in their culture, that therefore it is futile to try to change them, and that we should simply learn to coexist. Trying to spread democracy by force, as we see, only gives power to despots like Putin, who can describe themselves as heroes standing up to America. Then again, I do not agree that we can't say which one is better. The American system has been stable for 2.5 centuries, and its subjects are happy with it, whereas Russia and China went through a lot of turmoil and revolutions. People are immigrating en masse from despotic to democratic countries, and very few go in the opposite direction. Humans, it seems, prefer to be free, no matter what culture they are from. It is just a question of how long it takes them to change their own culture and make it compatible with liberal democracy. So what should be done? Luckily, technology already presented a solution. The internet allows us to communicate with people all over the world and fight the battle of ideas on the ground level. People in despotic countries are influenced by the West, and their culture is changing as a result. Eventually, they rise up, and when they do, we can offer them help. This requires from the US to change its policy, and the thing that the anti-imperialists fail to realize or acknowledge is, it already has. The days of the neocons are over. America no longer tries to force regime changes abroad. The shift happened during the tenure of President Obama, who dictated a policy called leading from behind. This is what we are seeing in Ukraine today, where the Americans support the Ukrainians with money and weapons, but allow them to be the ones fighting for their freedom. It is too early to tell if this is a true shift in the American foreign policy, leaving its imperialism behind, or just a temporary thing. But the change did happen. And here, again, the woke got in the way. It is hard to win the battle of ideas for liberalism when you have a large and noisy group of people twisting liberal values into woke values. Wokeness scared a lot of people in more conservative cultures who would rather deal with despotism if this is what liberalism is about. Like I said, I am confident that liberal societies will eventually defeat wokeness, but in the meantime, it causes serious harm to the fight for freedom around the world. From imperialism we move to globalism, and it is important to make the distinction between them. Many so-called anti-globalists, who are usually right-wingers, conflate globalism with American imperialism, and as a result, they come to positions very similar to those of the left-wing anti-imperialists. By globalists, I mean a group of people, mainly from the West, who perceive themselves as the first citizens of the united world of the future, and try to advance this vision. Many of them belong to the financial and political elite, which means that they have a lot of power, and they sit around making plans for the future of the globe, and how they are going to make all of us jump on board. This leads to many conspiracy theories, claiming that the globalists are trying to become our overlords. In reality, I believe these globalists mean well, but they are so elitist that they don't realize how Orwellian they look to the rest of us. And this is why the anti-globalists thrive. Recently, for instance, the globalists held a conference in Saudi Arabia, which was titled Davos in the Desert. One of the panels was called Welcome to the New Global Order. Seriously, it's hard to say it out loud without instinctively adding Muhahahaha. When you read the outline, you realize that they are just talking about recent global changes. But it shows how tone-deaf they are, and their behavior scares many people, allowing someone like Putin to present himself as their champion and gain more power.
This form of hegemony the West wants to install and keep, such is its real intention. And if they can't succeed, they will destroy other countries, create humanitarian disasters. It will destroy millions of human lives. It is because of that intention that the West has been waging war on Russia. They would like Russia to be a Western colony. But we're not talking here about cooperation on equal footing. They want to plunder us. They want us to be their slaves. We don't see eye to eye with them, and that's why they've been challenging our own philosophers, because our own culture, our own civilization represents a challenge to them. Our own well-being is a challenge to them. They don't need Russia, but we do need Russia.
If that's not bad enough, the globalists have allowed the woke nonsense to infiltrate their agenda, and anti-globalists capitalize on it to claim that they are trying to engineer us and turn us all into bug-eating, gay peasants. In the West it is mostly a joke, but in Russia, and elsewhere, it generates rabid homophobia. Globalism, at the moment, is doing more harm than good. I'll repeat my position on the issue of globalism. I believe a global society is where we are headed. Just like tribes got together and formed nations, the nations will probably get together and form bigger blocks, eventually resulting in a global society. So I am not opposed to the idea itself. However, for this global society to be a happy and thriving one, it has to emerge in an organic way, in a bottom-up process. It cannot be achieved in a top-down manner. Nations have to develop an affinity to each other, get to the point where there's more uniting than dividing them, and only then unionize. This is why I am iffy about the European Union. I think they are moving too fast. The politicians running it, the European Commission, act as if they are running a country, and that's far from being the case. We see it on the Ukraine issue. Think of your own country. If part of it was attacked by a foreign enemy, it would go without saying that it's as if the entire country was attacked, and you must all get together to defend your brethren. The European people generally support Ukraine, but they don't act like they themselves were attacked, and don't think they should go and fight for Ukraine. There is no European identity, and without such an identity, the European Commission in Brussels will always feel imposed. Then again, Ukraine can be the moment when such an identity starts to form. The coming winter will be tough for Europeans, and they will all suffer together for the sake of Ukraine. If they prevail, it will be the first time when Europe stood together against a foreign enemy, the first shared experience all Europeans had. This is something that a true union can be built on. This winter will be telling, and we will see if Europe can indeed unite on something. And then there's nationalism. Nationalism has been maligned and undermined in the West in recent decades, as the globalists portrayed it as the cause of the two world wars. In fact, imperialism was the cause of the wars, and nationalism is the enemy of imperialism. But nationalism can be bad as well. Bad nationalism is top-down nationalism, when an ideal image of the nation is imposed on the people, and they are expected to serve it and live up to it. This is the nationalism we see in today's Russia. But there is also bottom-up nationalism, of a people bound together by history, culture, values, and ethos, forming an organic identity that can grow and change with the time. This is the nationalism that has developed in Ukraine, and this is what the Putin regime is trying to destroy. When Putin refers to the Ukrainian government as Nazis, what he means is that they are nationalists. They dare to develop their own national identity, distinct from the Russian identity, and that he cannot abide. He regards the Ukrainian people as fellow Russians, and cannot fathom, in his imperialist mind, that they would want to be something else. So, he concludes, it is only a small group of people that have taken over the country, and are imposing a fake national identity on it. In the beginning of the war, he even addressed the Ukrainian people and tried to make them see things his way.
Должен обратиться и к военнослужащим вооруженных сил Украины. Уважаемые товарищи, ваши отцы, деды и прадеды не для того сражались с нацистами, защищая нашу общую родину, чтобы сегодняшние неонацисты захватили власть на Украине. Вы давали присягу на верность украинскому народу, а не антинародной хунте, которая грабит Украину и издевается над этим самым народом. Не исполняйте ее преступных приказов. Призываю вас немедленно сложить оружие и идти домой.
Putin, we see, is trying to deny the national identity of Ukraine. And not just Ukraine. The nation-state is being undermined all over the West, mostly by its own globalists and woke ideologues, but also with the help of the anti-liberal countries, mainly Russia. The Russians, in the past decade or so, have been putting a lot into spreading memes designed to undermine the Western national identities. Why is it, then, that the so-called anti-globalists regard Putin as a hero? Same problem as with the anti-imperialists. They have a one-dimensional view of the world. They see only the globalists as a threat to their nation-state, and since Putin appears to stand up to globalism, they idolize him, not realizing that imperialism is an even bigger threat. And so, they fall for this type of demagoguery.
Because the West simply will not accept such integration. They want the people to get away from sovereignty. They want the people to just walk into the hands of the United States. Indeed, some people in the West are happy to become the vassals of the United States. Others have been corrupted into this.
Putin is trying to convince us that the democratic countries have adopted the values of America and thus gave up on their national identity. This is a rhetorical trick, putting democracy in the place of globalism in an attempt to tarnish democratic values. In fact, democracy only strengthens the national identity. To say it more strongly, democracy and nationalism are codependent and cannot exist without each other. Without a nation-state, with a strong national identity, there is nothing to hold the people together despite their ideological differences, and democracy descends into anarchy. Without democracy, which gives the people the ability to organically grow as a nation, the nation is stamped in the image of its despotic ruler, stagnates, and eventually decays and crumbles. This is a lesson that unfortunately has been largely forgotten in the West, and this allows globalists and imperialist countries like Russia to undermine nationalism and democracy. Ukraine is the first country to truly stand up to Russia and flaunt its national identity in its face, and that is why I am optimistic for the future of Ukrainian democracy, if it survives this war. Hopefully, it will be an inspiration to other Western nations to strengthen their national identity. This, then, is why I say the Russian invasion of Ukraine is the culmination of the culture wars. And the question is, what effect will it have on the culture wars? What would constitute a victory for liberalism, and what would be a defeat? Well, first of all, there's the territorial question. The 4 Ukrainian oblasts that were annexed are considered by the Russians to be part of historic Russia. They already control most of them, and are trying to conquer the rest. But I suppose that if they end up with what they have now, they will see it as a victory. On the other hand, some analysts predict that they will lose it all, and then lose Crimea as well. The Ukrainian people certainly believe so, and their current mindset is that they will settle for nothing less. It seems overly optimistic to me, and this war will probably end when both sides exhaust each other out, realize they can't get what they want, and agree to compromise. This is their business. Our business, in this video, is how the world will look after the war. Here, I think there are several criteria to measure the impact and determine who won. The first criterion, of course, is how Ukraine itself emerges from this war. The Russians deny that the Ukrainian nation even exists, and therefore argued that Ukraine should not exist as a nation-state. As a Jew, believe me, I know how it feels when someone denies your nationhood. Some say that Putin is also afraid that the existence of a democracy of East Slavic people, right on his doorstep, might give the Russian people some dangerous ideas, and he wants to prevent that. But the result of his actions has been that he only strengthened the Ukrainian national identity, and pushed it towards the West and towards democracy. If Ukraine comes out of the war as a nation-state, with liberal democracy, it will be a huge win for the free world. The second thing that Putin wanted to achieve in this war was to push NATO back. Here, too, it seems to have backfired. It looks like more countries will join NATO, and the NATO members will invest more in their military power. This, too, is a positive development for the future, because the West still has to hold back not only Russian imperialism, but also Chinese imperialism, and, of course, Muslim imperialism. This already looks like a win for liberalism. Another thing Putin wanted to achieve was to re-establish Russia as an empire, a formidable power on the world stage. This has backfired gloriously. It turns out that the mighty Russian army can't even defeat an army that has no navy, not much of an air force, and geriatrically old tanks. The ramifications for Russia might be that it ends up losing a lot more than Ukraine. In any case, Putin's Russia has played a very negative role on the world stage, and its diminished image is good news. Those were three criteria on which Putin is currently losing badly, and liberalism is triumphant. But there are some in which the picture is less clear. Putin also wants to undermine the West, and he believes that the Western countries will be torn apart over support for Ukraine. Time will tell if he is right, and if he can claim victory on this. In the meantime, he has to worry about the undermining of his own regime. The contract that he had with the Russian people was that they let him and his cronies rule and get rich, while he doesn't meddle too much in their private lives. This was broken once he was forced to mobilize the people and send them to the front, and there's a lot of discontent in Russia. Add to that the fact that the Russian army was revealed as a paper tiger, which might give some regions the idea that they can rebel and break away, and we see that the Russian Federation might fall apart. I don't see any good outcomes for Russia in the foreseeable future. Some are hoping for the fall of Putin and the rise of a more democratic Russia, but I doubt the Russian spirit is ready for that. I will settle for seeing the liberal democracies withstand the Russian attack. The fifth criterion is the economic war. Putin prepared for years for this invasion, arranging alternative economic options for the expected Western sanctions. But I doubt he banked on the war lasting for so long. He believed he will finish the Ukraine business quickly, and then the West will come crawling back and beg for Russia's energy. We will see how the West handles the coming winter, but in the meantime, the Russian economy is in shambles, and with the most intelligent among the young fleeing the country, the future of Russia looks bleak. We are about to witness which model of a country has a better economy, a liberal one or an authoritarian one. This economic war is part of a bigger plan that Putin had, which is to build a bloc of countries wishing to fight back against Western hegemony. Countries like China, India, Brazil, Venezuela, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. There is also another bloc of dictatorships supporting each other, which includes the aforementioned countries minus India and Brazil, and plus Belarus, North Korea, and others. These countries have been cooperating for a while in all sorts of ways, and Putin is evidently trying to galvanize them into a bloc, with Russia taking a leading role. He has had some successes on this front, but so far, it seems that these countries have no interest in his leadership. Finally, of course, there's the question of the culture wars. All of these criteria will affect the culture wars, and Putin is hoping it will undermine liberalism in favor of his idea of authoritarian conservatism. As mentioned, he is a hero to anti-liberals in the West, and his success or failure will project on them. These are the stakes. This is what's on the line. These are the criteria by which I will judge this war. The outcome will mean a lot, not just for Ukraine and Russia, but for the world we all live in.